In the heart of the Sahel, a 37-year-old army captain named Ibrahim Traoré has ignited a fire that threatens to reshape the global order. As the interim president of Burkina Faso, Traoré's meteoric rise since his 2022 coup is not just a regional phenomenon, it's a direct challenge to the geopolitical architecture the United States has meticulously crafted in Africa for decades. His unapologetic anti-imperialist rhetoric, expulsion of Western forces, and pivot toward Russia and China signal a broader African awakening that is forcing Washington to confront an uncomfortable truth. The continent is no longer content to be a passive player in the great power game. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sit back as it unfolds. From the Pentagon to Foggy Bottom, Traoré's revolution is viewed with a mix of alarm, fascination, and strategic recalibration. This is not merely the story of one man or one nation, it's the story of Africa's radical reassertion of sovereignty and the profound implications for U.S. interests in a multipolar world. Act 1. The Man Who Dares to Defy. Ibrahim Traoré is no ordinary leader. Born in 1988 in Bondakwi, Burkina Faso, he emerged from humble roots to become a geology graduate and a decorated military officer. His frontline experience against jihadist insurgencies in Burkina Faso's north forged a steely resolve and a deep frustration with the status quo. By 2022, he had seen enough: corrupt elites, ineffective governance, and foreign powers profiting from Burkina Faso's gold while its people languished. His coup against Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba was swift, bloodless, and wildly popular, propelled by a youth demographic, median age, 17.7, desperate for change. Traoré's rhetoric, echoing the revolutionary zeal of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's martyred icon, is electrifying. A slave who cannot assume his own revolt does not deserve to be pitted. From a U.S. perspective, Traoré is a paradox. He's a charismatic nationalist who commands loyalty not through fear but through a vision of African self-reliance. Yet his actions, expelling French troops, nationalizing mines, and rejecting IMF loans, are a direct rebuke to Western influence. The Pentagon's Africa Command, AFRICOM, sees him as a destabilizing force, with General Michael Langley testifying in April 2025 that Traoré's illegitimate junta is diverting gold reserves to sustain itself, undermining U.S. counterterrorism efforts. Meanwhile, the State Department grapples with his popularity, which extends beyond Burkina Faso to a continent-wide youth movement chanting his name from Ouagadougou to Lagos. Traoré's defiance is not just a policy challenge, it's a cultural and ideological earthquake that threatens to erode America's soft power in Africa. Act 2. The Geopolitical Chessboard. Traoré's revolution is unfolding against a backdrop of tectonic shifts in global politics. For decades, the U.S. has viewed Africa as a theater for counterterrorism and resource access, with bases in Niger, Djibouti, and Kenya anchoring its security strategy. Burkina Faso, though small, was a key partner in the fight against groups like Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM. Traoré's expulsion of French forces in 2023 and his pivot to Russian Wagner Group mercenaries, now replaced by official Russian advisors, have disrupted this framework. His alignment with the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and flirtations with China's Belt and Road Initiative signal a deliberate reorientation toward non-Western powers. From Washington's vantage point, this is a strategic nightmare. A 2024 Pentagon report warned that Russian and Chinese influence in the Sahel could grant them access to critical minerals, gold, uranium, lithium, vital for global supply chains. Traoré's nationalization of mines, including those previously owned by Western firms like Suruma Resources and Endeavour Mining, has sparked arbitration disputes and fears of a broader resource grab. The U.S. Treasury Department is particularly alarmed by Traoré's rejection of the CFA franc, a French-backed currency seen as a stabilizing force, and his push for a new Sahel currency backed by Russia or China. Such a move could undermine the dollar's dominance in African trade and embolden other nations to follow suit. Yet, the U.S. response has been hamstrung by its own contradictions. Publicly, Washington condemns Traoré's junta as undemocratic, but privately, diplomats acknowledge that his popularity makes sanctions risky. Alienating Burkina Faso could push it further into Moscow's orbit, a scenario that haunts policymakers still reeling from Niger's 2023 expulsion of U.S. troops. The CIA's Africa division is reportedly monitoring Traoré's inner circle for signs of fracture, while the National Security Council debates whether to engage or isolate him. The stakes are high. If Traoré stabilizes Burkina Faso without Western aid, he could inspire a domino effect across Africa, unraveling decades of U.S. investments in governance and security. Act 3. The Ideological Battlefield. Traoré's revolution is as much about ideas as it is about power. His Pan-Africanist vision, rooted in the legacies of Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Sankara, resonates with a generation disillusioned by democracy's unfulfilled promises. In Burkina Faso, where 40% of territory is controlled by jihadists and 2 million people are displaced, Traoré's pledge to prioritize security over elections has struck a chord. His rejection of IMF, modern slavery, and Western, humanitarian propaganda taps into a deep vein of resentment against neo-colonialism. Social media amplifies his message, with AI-generated tributes and viral speeches reaching millions across Africa and its diaspora. For the U.S., this ideological surge is a wake-up call. The Council on Foreign Relations has warned that ardor for authoritarianism is gaining traction in Africa, fueled by frustration with democratic stagnation. Traoré's appeal exposes the limits of America's democracy promotion agenda, which often clashes with its support for pro-Western autocrats like Cameroon's Paul Biya or Chad's late Idriss Déby. The State Department's Bureau of African Affairs is scrambling to counter Traoré's narrative, but its messaging, centered on human rights and electoral integrity, feels out of touch to a continent grappling with existential threats like terrorism and poverty. The U.S. media, too, is divided. Outlets like The Economist lament Traoré as a retro-revolutionary who could destabilize the region, while progressive voices argue that his defiance reflects legitimate grievances against Western exploitation. The Biden administration's Africa strategy, unveiled in 2022, emphasized partnership and listening, but Traoré's rise has exposed its fragility. His ability to frame the West as the enemy while portraying Russia and China as partners in sovereignty has caught U.S. public diplomacy flat-footed. The irony is stark. America's own rhetoric of freedom and self-determination is being weaponized against it by a leader who sees the U.S. as complicit in Africa's subjugation. Act 4. The Security Conundrum. Burkina Faso's security crisis is Traoré's Achilles heel and America's leverage point. The country is the world's most terrorism-affected nation, with jihadist groups like JNIM and Islamic State Sahel killing thousands annually. Traoré's promise to reclaim territory has faltered, Russian advisors have proven less effective than Western forces, and reports of junta abuses against civilians have tarnished his image. In April 2025, his government thwarted a coup plot allegedly backed by Ivory Coast, a U.S. ally, raising fears of regional escalation. The U.S. military sees an opportunity here. AFRICOM has quietly increased drone surveillance over the Sahel, sharing intelligence with regional partners like Ghana and Senegal. The Pentagon is also lobbying Congress for more funding to train African forces, arguing that a light footprint approach can counter both jihadists and Russian influence. However, Traoré's refusal to engage with U.S. officials, evidenced by his rejection of a White House invitation in May 2025, complicates these efforts. Some analysts urge a pragmatic approach, offer Traoré security assistance in exchange for moderation, much like the U.S. did with Ethiopia's Abiy Ahmed. Others warn that such a deal would legitimize a dictator and alienate democratic allies. The human cost of this standoff is staggering. Over 40% of Burkina Faso's schools and health facilities are closed, and humanitarian aid is dwindling as Western donors pull back. The UN estimates that 2.5 million Burkinabe need assistance, a crisis exacerbated by Traoré's focus on military spending over social services. For the U.S., the question is whether to double down on pressure or pivot to engagement. The former risks further chaos. The latter, a tacit admission that America's influence is waning. Act V. The Economic Gambit. Traoré's economic agenda is perhaps his boldest gamble, and the most threatening to U.S. interests. Burkina Faso is Africa's fourth-largest gold producer, and Traoré's nationalization of mines has disrupted Western firms while boosting state revenues. His government is building a gold refinery and exploring nuclear energy with Russian backing, moves that could reduce dependence on Western markets. He's also distributed farm machinery and launched infrastructure projects, from rural roads to a new airport, to stimulate local economies. From a U.S. perspective, these policies are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they challenge the liberal economic order that Washington champions, with its emphasis on free markets and foreign investment. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has warned that Traoré's protectionism could deter investment across Africa, stifling growth. On the other hand, his focus on self-reliance aligns with America's own rhetoric of empowering African economies. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, a cornerstone of U.S.-Africa trade, is up for renewal in 2025, and Traoré's rise has sparked debate over whether to expand its scope to reward reformist leaders, even if they're authoritarian. The bigger picture is resource competition. China's dominance in African infrastructure and Russia's growing foothold in minerals threaten to sideline the U.S., which lags in direct investment. Traoré's partnership with Beijing, including a $400 million rail project, and his $88 million gold deal with Moscow underscore this shift. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that Africa holds 30% of the world's critical minerals, making Traoré's control of Burkina Faso's resources a flashpoint in the new Cold War. Washington's response, sanctions, trade incentives, or a mix of both, will shape not just bilateral ties but the broader U.S.-Africa relationship. Act 6. The Youth Factor. Africa is the world's youngest continent, with 60% of its population under 25. Traoré's appeal to this demographic is his greatest asset and America's greatest challenge. His media-savvy persona, from fiery speeches to viral TikTok videos, has made him a cultural icon. At Ghana's presidential inauguration in January 2025, Traoré received louder applause than any other leader, a testament to his continental stardom. Afrobarometer surveys show 66% of Burkinabés support military rule, a sharp rise from 24% in 2012, reflecting a broader trend of youth disillusionment with democracy. The U.S. has struggled to connect with this generation. Its cultural exports, Hollywood, music, tech, are omnipresent, but its political messaging feels paternalistic. Traoré's narrative of Western exploitation resonates more than USAID's promises of development. The U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou has ramped up exchange programs and social media campaigns, but these efforts pale against Traoré's grassroots momentum. The Peace Corps, once a symbol of American goodwill, has been absent from Burkina Faso since 2017, leaving a void that Russian and Chinese soft power is filling. The risk for Washington is a lost generation. If African youth embrace Traoré's vision of sovereignty over America's vision of partnership, the U.S. could find itself marginalized in a continent poised to drive global growth. By 2050, Africa will account for 25% of the world's population, and its economic and political choices will shape the 21st century. Traoré's ability to harness this demographic power makes him not just a regional threat but a global one. The long game. As Ibrahim Traoré consolidates power, the U.S. faces a strategic dilemma: how to respond to a leader who is both a destabilizing force and a symbol of African agency. His tenure, potentially extending to 2029 under a new transition plan, will test America's ability to adapt to a changing world. The Biden administration's Africa Summit, planned for late 2025, will be a critical moment to articulate a new approach, one that balances security, economic, and ideological imperatives. For now, Traoré's revolution is a mirror reflecting America's own contradictions: a champion of democracy that props up dictators, a critic of authoritarianism that ignores popular will, a superpower that struggles to inspire. His rise is a warning that Africa is no longer a chessboard for great powers but a player in its own right. The question is whether the U.S. can rise to the challenge, or whether it will be left watching as a new world order takes shape without it. The path forward. Ibrahim Traoré's rise is a clarion call for the United States to rethink its Africa strategy. His defiance, rooted in a demand for sovereignty, exposes the fragility of America's influence in a continent awakening to its own power. Washington must choose: cling to outdated paradigms of control or embrace a new partnership that respects African agency while safeguarding U.S. interests. The clock is ticking. Traoré's revolution is not just reshaping Burkina Faso, it's redefining the global order. The U.S. can either adapt or be left behind in a world where Africa's voice grows louder. As the sun sets over the Sahel, Ibrahim Traoré stands at the vanguard of a continent on the cusp of transformation. His story is unfinished, a saga of rebellion, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of a new African destiny. For the United States, the challenge is existential: to navigate this seismic shift with humility, pragmatism, and vision. The future of global politics hangs in the balance, and Africa, led by figures like Traoré, is writing its own chapter. The world watches, and the stakes could not be higher.